The council chamber stretched out like a massive crystal cave, glowing with soft blue light that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Ambassador Kyle Harris stood at the speaker's platform, looking up at the beings who controlled half the galaxy. They sat on floating seats arranged in a circle above him, looking down like judges deciding the fate of insects. Kyle had been making the same speech for 3 weeks now. His voice was getting hoarse and his patience was running thin. He held up a datapad showing images of burning cities and fleeing refugees. The Zrathian Empire had just invaded another world, and millions were dying while the council did nothing. The Kalari people have asked for help, Kyle said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. They have no military. They have no weapons. The Zrathians will kill them all within a week. We have to do something. The council members looked at him with expressions ranging from boredom to mild annoyance. Most of them had been alive for thousands of years. They had seen wars come and go. One more dying civilization was just another day to them. Velastrin spoke first. The ancient being looked like a column of golden light shaped roughly like a person. When it talked, the words seemed to appear directly in Kyle's mind rather than through his ears. Ambassador Harris, we understand your concern. However, the Koshari Accords are very clear. The Council does not interfere in territorial disputes between member species. This isn't a dispute, Kyle shot back, his frustration breaking through his diplomatic training. This is genocide. The Zrathians have destroyed 15 civilizations in the last century. How many more have to die before you consider it your problem? Another council member, a massive creature covered in crystalline scales, shifted in its floating seat. The Accords exist for good reasons, human. If we intervene every time a stronger species conquers a weaker one, we would be at war constantly. The galaxy would never know peace, Kyle wanted to scream. He wanted to tell them that their peace was built on the graves of countless innocent people. But he had learned over the past months that losing his temper would accomplish nothing. These beings had made up their minds long before he ever entered the chamber. Then what good is this council? Kyle asked quietly. What is the point of having all this power if you refuse to use it to protect people who can't protect themselves? Velastrin's light dimmed slightly, which Kyle had learned meant the being was becoming impatient. The council maintains order and facilitates trade across thousands of worlds. We provide a forum for peaceful resolution of conflicts. That is our purpose, and we fulfill it well. You facilitate nothing, Kyle said. You watch people die and call it neutrality. The chamber fell silent. Several council members exchanged glances. Kyle knew he had crossed a line, but he didn't care anymore. He had spent months being polite and diplomatic, following all their rules and procedures, and it had accomplished exactly nothing. This session is concluded, Velastrin announced. The council's position remains unchanged. The Koshari Accords will be honored. Kyle stood there for a moment, looking up at the beings who held the power to save millions with a single word but chose not to. Then he turned and walked out of the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Outside, Commander Lisa Morgan was waiting for him. She was the captain of the diplomatic vessel that had brought Kyle to Nexus Prime, the massive space station where the council met. She took one look at his face and knew how the meeting had gone. They said no again, she stated rather than asked. They always say no, Kyle replied, walking beside her through the station's gleaming corridors. Alien species from across the galaxy moved around them, going about their business as if nothing was wrong. They hide behind their accords and their procedures while people die. Lisa had been monitoring the situation at Viridian 4, the Kalari homeworld. The Zrathian fleet was only hours away now. She had watched the desperate evacuation efforts, seen the families trying to flee with whatever they could carry. Most wouldn't make it off-world before the invasion began. What are you going to do? Lisa asked as they entered the observation deck of their ship. Through the massive windows, they could see the stars and the dozens of ships docked at the station. Kyle pulled out his communicator, a small device that could send messages faster than light across the galaxy. He had been avoiding this moment, hoping against hope that the council would finally do the right thing. But hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. I'm going to tell Earth what's happening here, Kyle said. I'm going to tell them that the Galactic Council is a joke, that all their promises of protection and justice are lies, that if we want to make a difference in this galaxy, we'll have to do it ourselves. That will violate the treaties, Lisa pointed out. If Earth intervenes, we'll be breaking galactic law. I know, Kyle said. He began typing his message, choosing each word carefully. He explained the situation. He explained that the Council would not help. He explained that the Kalari had maybe 12 hours before they were wiped out forever. He didn't ask for permission to act. He didn't make recommendations. He simply stated the facts and let Earth decide what to do with them. But he knew what choice they would make. Humanity hadn't survived all its wars and struggles by standing aside when innocent people needed help. Lisa watched him send the message, then looked out at the stars. If they come, the Council will never forgive us. We'll be outcasts, maybe even enemies of every civilization in the Council. Maybe, Kyle agreed. Or maybe we'll show them that their way isn't the only way. That sometimes you have to fight for what's right even if the rules say you shouldn't. The message transmitted, disappearing into the vast network of relay stations that connected the galaxy. Somewhere thousands of light years away, Earth would receive it, and then decisions would be made that would change everything. Kyle stood beside Lisa, looking out at the peaceful stars. In orbit around one of those distant points of light, the Kalari people were preparing to die. The greatest powers in the galaxy had decided their lives weren't worth the trouble of saving them, but Kyle had faith that humanity would see things differently. They had always been fighters. They had always stood up for the underdog, and if that meant becoming outlaws in the eyes of the Galactic Council, then so be it. The galaxy was about to learn what humans did when bureaucracy and rules got in the way of doing what was right. Admiral Jack Porter stood on the bridge of the Valiant Dawn, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the swirling lights of faster-than-light travel streak past the viewports. The carrier was massive, larger than any ship humanity had revealed to the Galactic Council. Behind it, stretched out across several light-seconds of space, 200 warships followed in perfect formation. The bridge crew worked quietly at their stations, running final checks on weapons systems and shields. They all knew what they were heading into. They had all volunteered for this mission knowing they might not come back. But when Admiral Porter had asked for volunteers, every single ship in the Hidden Fleet had raised their hand. Lieutenant Commander Greg Sullivan approached the Admiral's command chair, carrying a data pad. "Sir, all ships report ready. Jump calculations are confirmed. We'll arrive in Viridian's orbit in 45 minutes. Jack nodded slowly. 45 minutes until they broke every treaty humanity had ever signed with the Galactic Council. 45 minutes until they either saved a civilization or started a war that could end with Earth's destruction. "Tell the fleet to stay sharp," Jack said. "The Zrathians have been fighting wars for 100 years. We've only run simulations. They have experience on their side." "Yes, sir," Greg replied. "But we have surprise. They think we're just diplomats and traders. They have no idea we've been building warships. That was true enough. When humanity had first made contact with the Galactic Council 20 years ago, they had been cautious. Earth's leaders had smiled and signed treaties and played the role of grateful newcomers to galactic civilization. But privately, they had remembered every lesson history had taught them about trusting strangers with bigger guns. So while Earth's public shipyards built cargo vessels and science ships, the hidden yards in the shadow of Jupiter's moons had built something else. Carriers and destroyers, cruisers and frigates, weapons that pushed the limits of human engineering. An entire war fleet that the Council had no idea existed. Captain Amy Rogers sat in the command chair of the destroyer Phoenix Wind, reviewing tactical data on her screens. Her ship was smaller and faster than the Admiral's carrier, designed to get in close and hit hard. She had spent 5 years training her crew for this moment, running drills until they could operate their stations in their sleep. "Captain, we're receiving a fleet-wide transmission from the Admiral," her communications officer reported. "Put it on speakers," Amy ordered. Jack's voice filled the bridge, calm and steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to do. "All ships, this is Admiral Porter. In a few minutes, we're going to drop out of FTL in a war zone. The Zrathian fleet outnumbers us. They have better technology in some areas. They have combat experience we lack. But they don't have what we have." He paused, letting his words sink in. Amy found herself leaning forward, listening intently. "We have something worth fighting for," Jack continued. "Not territory. Not resources. Not glory. We're fighting because people who can't defend themselves are about to be murdered. And everyone with the power to stop it has chosen to look away. We're fighting because it's right. Because someone has to. Because if we don't stand up for the innocent, what's the point of having all these ships and weapons Amy felt a chill run down her spine. This was why she had joined the fleet. This was why she had spent years training for a war that might never come. Because sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. The Galactic Council says we're not supposed to interfere, Jack said, his voice taking on a harder edge. They say the Koshari Accords are sacred. That neutrality is more important than justice. Well, I say they're wrong. I say their accords have failed. And I say Earth will not stand by and watch another civilization die. The transmission ended. Amy looked around her bridge, seeing the determination on her crew's faces. They were ready. They were scared, but they were ready. Greg stood beside the Admiral watching the countdown timer. 30 minutes until they reached Viridian 4. He thought about the intelligence reports they had received. The Zrathian fleet had over 300 ships. They were brutal and efficient, having crushed every opponent they had faced for the last century. Do you think we can win, sir? Greg asked quietly. Jack was silent for a moment. I think we can make them pay for every inch. I think we can buy the Kalari time to evacuate more of their people. And I think we can show the galaxy that someone is willing to fight back against the Zrathians. Whether that's enough, we'll find out soon. The minutes ticked by. The crew of the Valiant Dawn sat at their stations, hands hovering over controls, eyes fixed on displays. In the hangar bays below, fighter pilots climbed into their cockpits. In the Marine quarters, soldiers checked their weapons one last time. Amy ran through her attack plan again. The Phoenix Wind would be part of the first wave, hitting the Zrathian formation from multiple angles to create confusion. It was risky, but the whole plan was risky. They were betting everything on shock and aggression, hitting the enemy before they could organize a proper response. Sir, preparing to drop out of FTL, the navigation officer announced. 10 seconds. Jack straightened in his chair. All hands battle stations. This is not a drill. Alarms sounded throughout the ship. Red lights flashed. Crew members who weren't already at their posts sprinted to get into position. The peaceful hum of the engines changed to a deeper rumble as power was diverted to weapons and shields. 5 seconds. The navigator counted down. 4, 3, 2, 1. The swirling lights of FTL travel vanished, replaced by the normal darkness of space filled with stars. But these stars weren't peaceful. Viridian 4 hung in the center of the view screen, a blue and green world that looked almost like Earth. And surrounding it, like sharks circling wounded prey, was the Zrathian fleet. Count 320 enemy vessels, the tactical officer reported. They're in standard siege formation. Multiple troop carriers preparing to launch landing craft. They haven't seen us yet, Greg observed. We came out right where we planned, in their sensor shadow. Jack allowed himself a small smile. Then let's introduce ourselves. All ships weapons free. Target the troop carriers first. We're not here to win a space battle. We're here to save lives. The order went out across the fleet network. 200 human warships powered up their weapons, targeting systems locking onto the Zrathian vessels. For a moment, everything was still. Then the Valiant Dawn fired the first shot and the Battle of Viridian 4 began. Warlord Krethix stood on the command deck of his flagship, watching the final preparations for the invasion. The Kalari world hung before him, defenseless and ripe for conquest. His troops were ready. His ships were in position. In another hour, the conquest would begin, and another primitive species would learn to kneel before the Zrathian Empire. His tactical officer, a young warrior named Vex, suddenly stiffened at his station. Warlord, I'm detecting something strange. Multiple objects appearing on sensors. Krethix barely glanced at the displays. Debris, probably. Or maybe the Kalari launched some kind of primitive satellites in a desperate attempt to defend themselves. Sir, these readings don't match anything in our database. They're large, very large, and there are dozens of them. No hundreds. Now Krethix paid attention. He moved to the tactical display, his armored body towering over Vex. What he saw made no sense. Ships were appearing in orbit, materializing out of nowhere in perfect formation. The computer was trying to identify them, running through every known vessel design in the galaxy. Human vessels, Vex reported, his voice uncertain. The computer identifies them as belonging to Earth. But that can't be right. Humans don't have a war fleet. They're diplomats and merchants. Krethix stared at the display, watching more and more ships appear. His mind raced. The humans had been members of the Galactic Council for 20 years. They had never shown any military strength. They had never even hinted they possessed weapons like this. The answer came 30 seconds later when the first railgun rounds tore through his forward battle line. The kinetic weapons traveled at a fraction of light speed, too fast for shields to adjust, too fast for ships to evade. 3 of his cruisers simply exploded, ripped apart by solid metal moving with enough energy to punch through anything in their path. 2 more ships went dark, their systems destroyed by the impacts. All ships combat formation, Krethix roared. Return fire! Target the human vessels. But the Zrathian fleet was spread out for an invasion, not arranged for ship-to-ship combat. It would take precious minutes to reorganize, and the humans weren't giving them those minutes. More railgun rounds slammed into his ships. Energy beams lanced out from human destroyers, cutting through armor like paper. Amy Rogers held onto her command chair as the Phoenix Wind rolled hard to port, evading a Zrathian plasma bolt by meters. Her crew worked with frantic efficiency, calling out targets and damage reports over the noise of battle. 2 Zrathian destroyers breaking formation. Heading right for us, her tactical officer called out. Good, Amy said calmly. That means they're not shooting at the Kalari evacuation ships. Weapons target the lead destroyer. I want every railgun we have hitting their bridge section. The Phoenix Wind shuddered as her weapons fired. The solid slugs raced across space, slamming into the Zrathian destroyer's command structure. The enemy ship's shields flared bright blue, absorbing the first impacts. But the second volley punched through, and the destroyer began venting atmosphere. Second destroyer firing, her tactical officer warned. Evasive pattern Delta, Amy ordered. Her pilot threw the ship into a spiral, the artificial gravity struggling to keep up with the violent maneuvers. A beam of superheated plasma passed through the space where they had been moments before. If they had been 1 second slower, the Phoenix Wind would have been cut in half. On Viridian 4's surface, Marine Colonel Jake Henderson watched the sky light up with explosions. His dropship had been one of the first to land, and now he and his Marines were setting up defensive positions around the main refugee centers. The Kalari civilians stared at the human soldiers in confusion and hope. They were small beings, barely reaching Jake's chest, with blue skin and large eyes that looked perpetually worried. Right now, they had every reason to be worried. Colonel, we have Zrathian landing craft breaking through the orbital battle. His communications officer reported. At least 20 of them heading for this position. Jake checked his rifle and looked at his Marines. They had set up heavy weapons at key points, established fallback positions, and mined the approaches. But they were fewer than 200 soldiers facing thousands of Zrathian troops. Tell the Kalari to get everyone into the shelters, Jake ordered, and tell our people to make every shot count. We hold this position no matter what. In space, the battle had descended into chaos. The organized formations had broken down into hundreds of individual ship-to-ship fights. Admiral Jack Porter tried to maintain some coordination, but the Zrathians were adapting quickly to human tactics. Sir, the carrier Morning Star just took a direct hit to her reactor, Greg reported, his voice tight. She's breaking up. Jack watched on his display as the carrier exploded, taking her entire crew with her. Hundreds of people gone in an instant. He forced himself to look away and focus on the larger battle. Redirect 3rd Squadron to cover their position, Jack ordered, and tell 4th Squadron to focus fire on that Zrathian battleship. It's coordinating their defense. The valiant Dawn shook as enemy fire impacted her shields. The massive carrier was drawing a lot of attention from Zrathian ships, exactly as Jack had planned. Every shot aimed at his flagship was a shot not aimed at his smaller, faster destroyers and frigates. Amy found herself in the fight of her life. Her ship had destroyed one Zrathian destroyer, but the second one was proving harder to kill. The enemy captain was good, anticipating her moves and matching her maneuver for maneuver. Shields down to 40%, her engineering officer called out. We can't take many more hits. Then we don't get hit, Amy replied. Pilot, bring us around for a close pass. I want to put us right in their blind spot. Her pilot looked back at her with wide eyes. Captain, that's going to put us within 50 meters of their hull. If either ship deviates even slightly, we'll collide. I know, Amy said. Do it anyway. The Phoenix Wind accelerated, racing toward the Zrathian destroyer at an angle that made her crew grip their stations in fear. The 2 ships passed so close that Amy could see the pockmarks on the enemy's hull. Then her weapons officer fired, and at point-blank range nothing could stop the railgun rounds. The Zrathian destroyer's hull ruptured in a dozen places, Secondary explosions rippled through the ship as ammunition stores detonated. The destroyer began to spin out of control, dead in space. On the surface, Jake and his Marines opened fire as the first Zrathian soldiers reached their position. The aliens were larger than humans, covered in thick natural armor that made them hard to kill, but human weapons had been designed to punch through armor, and the Marines aimed for weak points with deadly precision. The Zrathians had expected to face defenseless civilians. Instead, they ran into prepared positions defended by soldiers who had trained for years for exactly this kind of fight. The first wave of aliens fell, then the second, but there were always more coming. Fall back to secondary positions, Jake ordered as his ammunition counter showed red. Controlled retreat. Make them pay for every meter. In orbit, Warlord Krathix realized he was losing. His fleet had started with superior numbers, but the humans fought with a ferocity he had never encountered before. They didn't retreat when damaged. They didn't try to preserve their ships. They just kept attacking, trading blow for blow, accepting losses that would make any reasonable commander withdraw. Half his fleet was destroyed or disabled. The humans had lost fewer ships because they had focused their fire, overwhelming his vessels one by one before moving to the next target. It was brutal, efficient, and effective. Order all ships to withdraw, Krathix commanded, the words bitter in his mouth. We're leaving. The Zrathian fleet began to pull back, their ships breaking contact and accelerating away from Viridian 4. The human fleet let them go, too damaged to pursue. The Battle of Viridian 4 was over. The silence after the battle felt wrong. Commander Lisa Morgan stood on the observation deck of the Starlight, watching repair crews move between damaged ships. The human fleet had won, but the victory tasted bitter. 42 ships had been destroyed completely. Thousands of crew members had died. Many more were injured, but Viridian 4 still existed. The Kalari people still had their world, their lives, their future. Lisa had to keep reminding herself of that as she coordinated the relief efforts. On the planet's surface, Kalari leaders approached the human positions cautiously. They had watched the battle from their shelters, seen ships explode like stars being born and dying in moments. Now they wanted to thank the people who had saved them. Colonel Jake Henderson met them outside the refugee center, his armor still scorched from the fighting. The Kalari elder, a female named Kira, looked up at him with tears in her large eyes. You came, she said simply. Everyone said no one would help. The council said they couldn't interfere, but you came anyway. Jake didn't know what to say. He had just been following orders, doing his job. But looking at the grateful faces of the people they had saved, he felt the weight of what they had done settle on his shoulders. We couldn't stand by and watch, Jake finally replied. It wouldn't have been right. Kira reached up and took his hand, her small fingers barely wrapping around his. Our children will remember this. We will tell stories of the humans who broke the laws of the galaxy to save strangers. We will never forget. Across the galaxy on Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council had erupted into chaos. Ambassador Kyle Harris stood before them once again, but this time the atmosphere was very different. The council members weren't bored or dismissive. They were angry. Velastron's golden light burned brighter than Kyle had ever seen it. What you have done is beyond forgiveness, Ambassador Harris. You have violated the Koshari Accords. You have attacked another species without provocation. You have shown complete contempt for galactic law. The Zrathians were committing genocide, Kyle replied calmly. If that's not provocation, I don't know what is. That is not for you to decide, another council member snapped. This one looked like a floating crystal with multiple facets, each reflecting light in different colors. The council determines when intervention is necessary. Individual species cannot simply attack others because they disagree with our decisions. Then maybe your decisions need to change, Kyle said. Maybe the Koshari Accords need to change, because right now they're just an excuse for doing nothing while innocent people die. The chamber erupted in angry voices, dozens of council members shouting at once. Some demanded Earth be expelled from the council immediately. Others called for sanctions, trade embargoes, even military action against humanity. It seemed like the entire galaxy was turning against them. Then a new voice spoke up, quiet but firm enough to cut through the noise. I support what the humans did. Everyone turned to look. The speaker was the representative from the Torvian Union, a species whose homeworld had been destroyed by the Zrathians 10 years earlier. Her name was Lyra, and she stood at her platform with her head held high despite the shocked stares. The Council did nothing when the Zrathians came to our world, Lyra continued. They said the Accords prevented them from interfering. They said it would set a bad precedent. They said many things, but they did nothing. My people are scattered across the galaxy now, refugees with no home, because the Council valued rules more than lives. This is not the time for this discussion, Velastrin said, but his voice had lost some of its authority. When is the time? Lyra demanded. How many more civilizations have to die before we admit the Accords have failed? The humans had the courage to do what all of us should have done. They should be praised, not punished. Another representative stood up, then another. Species after species, all victims of Zrathian aggression, rose to speak in support of humanity's actions. The council chamber became divided, the ancient core worlds on one side demanding justice, the younger rim worlds on the other defending Earth. Admiral Jack Porter sat in the captain's ready room on the Valiant Dawn, reading the casualty reports. Each name represented someone who had trusted him, followed his orders, and paid the ultimate price. He had personally written letters to 42 families, trying to explain why their loved ones had died in a battle on the other side of the galaxy. Greg entered the room quietly, carrying another datapad. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Nexus Prime. The Council has reached a decision. Jack looked up from the casualty lists. Let me guess. They're going to make an example of us. Actually, sir, it's more complicated than that. The transmission played on the screen. Kyle's face appeared, looking exhausted but determined. Admiral, the Council has issued a formal censure against Earth for violating the Koshari Accords. However, they have decided not to pursue further sanctions or punitive actions at this time. Jack frowned. That's it? A censure? After all that arguing? Kyle smiled slightly. The Council is more divided than it's been in centuries. About half the member species support what we did. The other half wants us punished. But neither side has enough votes to take serious action, so they settled on a compromise that satisfies no one. What about the Zrathians? Jack asked. That's where it gets interesting, Kyle replied. The Council has also opened the Koshari Accords for revision. It's the first time in over 1,000 years that they've agreed to review the rules. It's going to take years of debate, but the conversation has started. We've proven that their system doesn't work. On Viridian 4, Lisa worked with the Kalari to begin rebuilding. Human engineers helped repair power systems. Medical teams treated the wounded. Supply ships brought food and materials. It was the first time humanity had undertaken a large-scale, humanitarian mission on an alien world. Captain, Amy Rogers visited the planet's surface during a break from repairs on the Phoenix Wind. She walked through the refugee centers, seeing Kalari families beginning to return to their homes. Children played in the streets, their laughter a sharp contrast to the burned buildings and battle scars. A small Kalari child approached her, carrying a flower she had picked from one of the surviving gardens. She held it up to Amy without speaking. Amy knelt down and accepted the flower, feeling her throat tighten with emotion. Thank you, she said quietly. The child smiled and ran back to her mother, who nodded gratefully to Amy before continuing on her way. On Nexus Prime, Kyle prepared for the long political battle ahead. Representatives from the Kalari and a dozen other species had contacted him, wanting to form a coalition to push for reform. The old order was changing, whether the ancient powers wanted it or not. He looked out at the stars from the observation deck, thinking about what they had started. Earth had become something new in galactic politics. Not just another member species following the rules, but a force for change. A wild card that couldn't be predicted or controlled. Was it worth it? Lisa asked, joining him at the window. She had returned from Viridian 4 to help with the diplomatic efforts. Kyle thought about the 42 ships they had lost. The thousands of dead, the families grieving across Earth. Then he thought about the Kalari children playing in the streets, alive because humanity had chosen to act. Yes, he said. It was worth it. And I'd do it again. Lisa nodded slowly. So would I, so would everyone in the fleet. We've changed the galaxy, Kyle. There's no going back now. No, Kyle agreed. There's no going back. The Galactic Council maintained its neutrality for 3,000 years. That era is over. We made sure of that. They stood together, watching the ships come and go from the massive station. Earth's representatives now both celebrated and condemned, depending on who you asked. But no one could ignore them anymore. No one could pretend they were just another minor species playing by the rules. The humans had interfered, and the galaxy would never be the same. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Viridian 4, and the galaxy was still arguing about what it meant. Admiral Jack Porter stood in front of a mirror in his quarters, adjusting his dress uniform. The memorial ribbons on his chest represented every ship lost in the battle, 42 thin strips of black cloth that felt heavier than they should. Today was the day the Galactic Council would vote on Earth's final status. They could be expelled from the Council, sanctioned so heavily that Earth would be isolated from galactic trade, or even marked as a hostile species. Jack had been asked to attend personally, to stand before the Council and face the consequences of his actions. He wasn't sorry. Even now, knowing the price they might pay, he would make the same choice again. Some things were more important than politics and treaties. Ambassador Kyle Harris waited for him outside the council chamber. The diplomat looked older than he had 3 months ago, worn down by endless meetings and debates. But there was steel in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "They're ready for us," Kyle said. "Are you ready for them?" Jack smiled grimly. "I've faced down a Zrathian battle fleet. I think I can handle some angry politicians." They entered the chamber together, walking to the center platform where so many arguments had been made. The council members sat in their floating seats above them, looking down with expressions ranging from anger to curiosity to something that might have been respect. Velastrin spoke first, his golden light steady and controlled. "Admiral Porter, Ambassador Harris, the Council has debated for 3 months about how to respond to Earth's actions at Viridian 4. We have heard arguments from all sides. Now we will vote." The chamber fell silent. Jack stood straight, his hands behind his back in a military stance. Whatever happened, he would face it with dignity. "The first motion," Velastrin continued, "is to expel Earth from the Galactic Council permanently for violations of the Koshari Accords." A display appeared in the air, showing the voting results as they came in. The numbers climbed slowly. When the final count appeared, the motion had failed by a narrow margin. Just barely, Earth would remain part of the Council. The second motion is to impose severe economic sanctions on Earth for a period of no less than 10 years. Again the votes came in. Again the motion failed, this time by an even smaller margin. Jack could feel the tension in the chamber. The Council was split almost perfectly down the middle. "The third motion," Velastrin said, and his light dimmed slightly, "is to issue a formal censure against Earth for violating galactic law, with no additional penalties." This motion passed easily. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but was acceptable to just enough members to gain majority support. "Earth will remain in the Council," Velastrin announced. "But let it be known that your actions have been condemned. You have broken laws that have maintained galactic peace for thousands of years." Kyle stepped forward. "With respect, Counselor, those laws maintained peace for some while others died. That's not peace. That's just choosing not to see the violence happening around you." "You speak out of turn, Ambassador," another council member snapped. "Someone needs to." Kyle replied calmly, "Because this vote changes nothing. The Koshari Accords are still going to be revised. Species are still going to question why the Council failed them. And the next time someone needs help and you refuse to give it, there will be others willing to step in." Velastrin's light flickered. "You speak of fracturing the Council, of encouraging others to break our laws. I speak of justice," Kyle said. "If your laws prevent justice, then yes, they should be broken." The chamber erupted in argument again, but Jack noticed something interesting. The younger species, the ones from the Rim worlds who had experienced Zrathian aggression, were nodding in agreement. The old order was changing and not everyone was fighting it. Far from Nexus Prime in the depths of Zrathian space, Warlord Krethix stood before the High Command. He had been summoned to explain his defeat at Viridian 4, the first time in a century that a Zrathian fleet had been forced to retreat. "The humans are stronger than we believed," Krethix reported. "Their fleet is large and well-armed. More importantly, they're willing to fight. They don't retreat when damaged. They accept casualties that would break most species." The High Command members exchanged glances. They were ancient beings having led the Empire's expansion for generations. This news troubled them deeply. "The Council has always prevented others from opposing us," one commander noted. "Their neutrality was our shield. If the humans have broken that shield, others may follow." Then we consolidate our territory, another commander decided. No new conquests until we understand this threat better. Strengthen our defenses. Study these humans. Learn their weaknesses. Krethix bowed and left the chamber. The Zrathian Empire was pulling back, reorganizing. For the first time in 100 years, their advance had stopped. On Earth, parades celebrated the returning fleet. But Admiral Jack Porter found no joy in the celebrations. He attended memorial services for the crews who hadn't come home, standing with families who had lost sons and daughters, husbands and wives, parents and friends. At one service, a mother approached him. Her son had been a navigator on the Morning Star, one of the ships destroyed in the battle. She was elderly, her face lined with grief. "Did he die for something important?" she asked quietly. Jack met her eyes, refusing to look away from her pain. "Ma'am, your son helped save an entire civilization. The Kalari people are alive today because of what he and his shipmates did. It doesn't make losing him hurt less, but yes, it was important." She nodded slowly, tears running down her face. "Then I'm proud of him. And I'm proud of you, Admiral, even if it hurts." Jack attended dozens of these services, each one leaving scars on his heart, but he never refused to go. These people deserved to hear from him personally, to know that their losses weren't forgotten or ignored. Captain Amy Rogers received a promotion and command of a new task force. Her mission was to patrol the border regions, responding to threats and protecting vulnerable species. The Phoenix Wind had been repaired and upgraded, and Amy was ready to continue the work they had started at Viridian 4. "We're setting a precedent," her new second-in-command said as they prepared to depart Earth. "Every time we intervene somewhere, we're saying that human values matter more than galactic law." "Maybe galactic law needs to reflect better values," Amy replied. "The Council has had thousands of years to get it right. They failed. Now it's someone else's turn." On Viridian 4, Commander Lisa Morgan had decided to stay permanently. She resigned from the fleet and took charge of Earth's humanitarian mission. The work was hard and often frustrating, but seeing the Kalari rebuild their world made it worthwhile. Kira, the Kalari elder, visited her often. The two had become friends despite their differences. Kira was teaching Lisa about Kalari culture, while Lisa helped coordinate reconstruction efforts with Earth and other sympathetic species. "How long will you stay?" Kira asked one day as they walked through a newly rebuilt neighborhood. "As long as I'm needed," Lisa replied. "Earth doesn't just want to save people. We want to help them build better futures. That takes time." "The Council never offered help like this," Kira observed. "They would have debated for years while we starved. You humans are strange. You break the rules to save us, then stay to help us rebuild. Why?" Lisa thought about it for a moment. "Because it's right. And because we remember what it's like to struggle, to fight for survival. Earth had its own dark times. Maybe that's why we can't just stand by and watch others suffer." On Nexus Prime, Kyle worked with representatives from 24 species to form a new coalition. They called themselves the Alliance for Intervention, and their goal was simple: revise the Koshari Accords to allow intervention in cases of genocide, slavery, and other clear moral wrongs. The ancient council members opposed them at every turn, but public opinion was shifting. News of what happened at Viridian 4 had spread across the galaxy. People were asking why the council had done nothing. They were asking what the point of having all that power was if it was never used to help anyone. "We're winning," Kyle told Lisa during one of their regular calls. "Slowly, painfully, but we're winning. In 10 years, maybe 20, the Accords will be revised. The Council will have to change." "What about Earth?" Lisa asked. "Are we going to be okay?" Kyle smiled. "We're going to be more than okay. We've become something the galaxy hasn't seen before. Not just another member species following the rules, but a force for change. The Council can't control us, and the Zrathians are afraid of us. We've carved out a unique position." In the shipyards above Jupiter's moons, construction continued on new vessels. Larger carriers, faster destroyers, weapons that pushed the boundaries of human engineering even further. The fleet that wasn't supposed to exist had been revealed to the galaxy, so there was no point hiding anymore. Admiral Jack Porter oversaw the construction personally. He had been promoted to head of Earth's entire military space command, a position that didn't officially exist until 3 months ago, but was now one of the most important in human government. "We're building a fleet that can protect not just Earth, but any species that needs help," Jack explained to a group of new recruits. "The galaxy is a